I remember the cold bite of that Christmas night before I remember the words themselves. The kind of thin December air you only get up in the foothills of Jefferson County, Colorado, where the pines turn almost black after sunset and every porch seems to glow with warm yellow lights. Inside my dad's house, everything looked perfect on the surface. The kind of holiday setting people send on postcards. Candles flickering, a fire crackling in the living room, the smell of roasted turkey drifting through the whole place. But beneath all that warmth, there was a pressure in the air, something sharp and invisible, like a wire pulled too tight. My name is Charlotte Hale, 34 years old, and that night was one of the moments that rerouted the course of my life. I want to pause for a second here, because I know many of you listening have lived through family holidays where the table looks picture perfect, but everyone is sitting on top of old wounds. Before I go deeper, I am curious, what are you doing while listening to this story right now? For me, during the moment everything happened, I was sitting at the far end of the table, trying to steady my breathing while smiling like nothing was wrong. I wonder where this story finds you. The evening had started stiff from the moment I walked through the door. My step into the house felt heavier than it should, like my body was reading danger even before my mind did. My dad's home was decorated exactly the way my mom used to like it years ago, before she passed. Soft gold lights on the banister, white candles in the windows, bowls of pine cones sprayed with that fake snow she loved. David kept it all the same, even though the warmth behind those decorations had faded long ago. Savannah was the first person I saw in the dining room. Savannah, my brother's wife, was already seated at the table. She had arranged her phone at just the right angle against a napkin holder and was whispering into it as if the whole night was her personal broadcast. Her hair was perfectly curled, and her smile was wide and bright and empty. She was telling her followers something about cherished family traditions and gratitude. Not once in her little holiday monologue did she look around long enough to notice if anyone at the table was actually enjoying the night. I sat down slowly, choosing the chair farthest from her glowing phone screen. My younger brother Andrew sat next to her, laughing under his breath, as if they were sharing some inside joke the rest of us were too boring to understand. He barely acknowledged me. I had spent the past year rebuilding the foundation of our family company, Hale Industrial Supply, while he spent most of his time golfing and letting Savannah shape herself into the face of the business. He treated my effort like background noise in his world. Dinner started awkwardly enough. Everyone took their seats, glasses clinked, and conversations layered on top of each other, just enough to sound normal. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine we might actually get through them. A night without any of the usual barbs tossed my way. But Savannah was never one to let a spotlight pass. She set down her fork, angled her body so the camera caught her face perfectly, and said in this syrupy voice that made my skin crawl that she hoped everyone could finally relax now that the stress of the quarter was behind us. Then she turned to my aunt, who had asked about the business earlier in the night, and added that it had been such a difficult year because someone, she said someone emphasized, as if she were sharing a scandal, kept withholding important financial documents and making decisions behind the company's back. My fork hit the plate too hard. I did not say anything. I did not need to. Every head turned toward me. Andrew jumped in right on cue. He gave this quiet sigh like he was so exhausted from dealing with me that he barely had the strength left to speak. He told the table that I had been trying to take over everything and that I refused to let anyone else see the long-term numbers. He even let out a short laugh, added that classic dramatic shrug of his, and said that sometimes people let power go to their heads. I felt heat spread from my chest to my neck. Not anger. Not yet. It was hurt first, the kind that steals your breath a little. My Aunt Lydia, who has always had a soft spot for me, put her fork down and said gently that she doubted I would ever do something like that. She reminded everyone that I had been the one keeping the business afloat for the last year, while Andrew was busy planning marketing shoots for Savannah. Andrew's face tightened. Savannah's smile flickered and died. David looked from one side of the table to the other, his jaw set harder with every passing second. He hated being challenged in front of people. He hated the very idea that someone might defend me over Andrew. I could see the storm building in him the way you can smell rain before it hits the ground. Savannah pressed her hand against her chest and said she did not want any drama tonight, but she just needed to be honest, because she could not keep pretending. Everything was fine when some people in the family were sabotaging progress. She used that word, sabotaging. She knew exactly how loaded it was. She looked right at me when she said it, her eyes shining with something like satisfaction. I sat perfectly still. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to ask her what documents she was even talking about, when she had not looked at a real ledger in her life. But I stayed quiet, hoping Dad would see through it, hoping he would catch the lie for once. Then Aunt Lydia said quietly that it was unfair to accuse me like that, especially after everything I had done for the company. And just like a spark in dry grass, the whole table shifted. David slammed both palms onto the table so hard, the silverware jumped. The entire room went silent in an instant. His eyes were red, not from alcohol, but from anger. Raw anger, the kind he rarely showed in public. He told me in a voice that cut straight through every memory I had of trying, to make him proud that he was done with me, done with the stress I brought him. He said he was disowning me, and that if I had anything to say about it, I could talk to his lawyer. For a moment, I thought the world had stopped. My body reacted before my mind did. My hands began to shake under the table. Not a small tremble, but a deep, uncontrollable shaking, like my nervous system had been unplugged. My throat closed, making it hard to swallow. But something inside me steadied at the same time. A strange calmness settled in. It came from a place I did not even know I had. I sat up straighter, folded my napkin, placed it gently beside my plate, and spoke. I told him, all right. Just that one word. All right. Mom tried to reach for his arm, her eyes already filling. She told him to stop, to calm down, that this was Christmas, that he was hurting me. But he jerked his arm away from her and told her enough, like her voice was. Some irritating noise he could not stand for one more second. The table was silent. Not even Savannah dared to breathe. But she did not need to. Her eyes said everything. She was pleased. She wanted this. I stood up without saying anything else. I walked to the coat rack by the door and slipped into my jacket. The house felt smaller suddenly, tighter, as if all the air had been swallowed. I could feel everyone watching me, watching whether I would cry or plead or fight back. I did none of those things. I reached for the doorknob, and right before I stepped outside, I looked back. Savannah was smiling. Not big and obvious, just a small, curved smirk at the corner of her mouth, the kind of smile someone makes when their plan has fallen perfectly into place. When the front door closed behind me, the cold slapped my face. I breathed in the icy night air and let it sting. It reminded me I was still standing, still me, still alive in a way that felt different, sharper. As I walked to my car, I realized something. They thought they had broken me. They thought I would crawl back or disappear or stay silent the way I always did, had. But that was the moment everything shifted. The exact moment the countdown began. 48 hours until every lie and every betrayal they had piled onto me would come crashing down on them. I started the engine, hands still shaking, and whispered to myself that this time, I was done protecting people who never once protected me. I did not know then just how fast the storm would break, or how deep the cracks inside that house already were, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The next chapter of my life began the second that door closed. I drove down the long hill from my dad's house with the cold still trapped in. My lungs and the road ahead of me blurred for a moment before I blinked it away. I kept telling myself to focus on the lines in front of me, to breathe slowly, to keep my hand steady on the wheel. But the truth was clearer than the road. That night had not begun at that table. It had begun decades earlier, long before Savannah ever stepped into our lives, long before Hale Industrial Supply became a battlefield instead of a business. The shake in my hands was not just from what happened at Christmas dinner. It came from a lifetime of being told, without words, and sometimes with them, that I did not belong in my own family. Thinking back to my childhood, the years blurred in a way I had never really examined until that night. Growing up in Jefferson County in the 90s meant long summers in the yard, football games on the local field, and evenings where my dad would stand with his arms crossed watching Andrew toss a ball back and forth with the neighborhood boys. He always lit up around Andrew. The pride on his face was unmistakable. I was there too, standing on the porch steps, wanting to join. But every time I asked, he said something like, later, or you have homework, or why do you want to play rough sports when you are a girl? I stopped asking after a while, and he never noticed when I did. By the time I turned 10, the pattern was solid. Andrew got new cleats every season for baseball. I got notebooks from the sale rack. When Andrew wanted to take karate for 2 months and quit, Dad paid for the classes without a second thought. When I asked to join a youth art program, he said it was too expensive and probably a passing interest. He never meant it to be cruel. He simply never saw me the same way he saw him. To him, Andrew was the future of the family, the name that would sit on the business sign someday. I was the daughter who would build her own life somewhere far away. I do not think he ever imagined I might want to be part of it. The older we got, the more dramatic the differences became. When Andrew wanted to go to a private baseball camp one summer, Dad worked extra hours to make it happen. When I applied for a science scholarship program, he said it sounded like too much work and asked why I did not just enjoy being a teenager. Even Mom, who loved me deeply, felt stuck between us. She tried to fight for me quietly, slipping me $20 here or buying me the art supplies Dad would not. She always whispered that she wished she could do more, but she was afraid of challenging him. She grew up in a generation where conflict was something you avoided, not confronted. Her guilt lived with her for decades, and now it lives in me. One memory from when I was 15 stays with me more clearly than all the others. Adam had an old pickup he used for work, and sometimes Andrew and I were allowed to drive it around the property. One afternoon, he stalled the engine. I saw him grind the gears hard before the truck lurched forward and died. Smoke rose from under the hood. Andrew panicked and said Dad was going to kill him. I told him we should just tell the truth. He begged me not to. He said I should take the blame because Dad never got as mad at me as he did at him. That was a lie, but I was young and stupid enough to believe it. When Dad stormed over, shouting about how expensive the repairs would be, Andrew slipped behind me and waited. I said it was my fault. Dad did not even let me finish before he lit into me. He said I was irresponsible and careless, said he expected better, said he could not trust me with anything. I remember the look on Andrew's face behind him. Relief, and then the smallest smile. Not cruel, just satisfied that he was safe. I cried quietly that night, not because I got yelled at, but because I understood something that changed me. In that house, fairness was optional, and it rarely leaned toward me. Mom came into my room a few hours later. She sat on the edge of the bed and stroked my hair like she used to when I was little. She said she saw what really happened. She said she knew Andrew was lying. She said she wanted to speak up, but did not want to start a fight. Her voice cracked when she apologized. Then she whispered something I have never forgotten. She said, "You are so smart and so capable, but in this house, nobody wants to see that because it makes them uncomfortable." It was the closest thing she had ever come to admitting that the ground between me and the rest of the family was not level, and maybe never would be. For years after that moment, I learned how to shrink myself, how to keep my achievements quiet, how to step aside so Andrew could shine. When I brought home good grades, Dad would nod and ask what Andrew scored. When I earned scholarships, he said I should thank him for pushing me. When the acceptance letter came from the university I wanted, he told me he was proud, but asked if I had considered staying local to help Andrew with the business. It was never enough for me to succeed. It mattered only if my success supported his future. Looking back now, with the cold from that Christmas night still sitting somewhere deep in my memory, I understand how those years shaped everything that happened later. The way Dad sided with Andrew automatically. The way Savannah learned she could twist stories and he would believe her. The way everyone at that table expected me to sit quietly while they painted, me as the villain. They did not learn that recently. They learned it over decades of watching me carry blame that did not belong to me. As I drove that night, the road stretched long and empty under a thin layer of frost. The headlights carved a narrow path through the dark, and I realized something important. The reason my hands had shaken at the table was not because Dad told me he disowned me. It was because a part of me had still hoped he never would. A part of me, even after all these years, wanted him to choose me just once. And he did not. But there was another part of me, growing stronger with each mile. A part that remembered Mom's whisper in my bedroom when I was 15. The part that had gotten lost, but not erased. The part that knew exactly who I was when nobody was watching. The house I rented sat at the edge of a small residential stretch in Golden. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the shaking had stopped. I locked the car, stepped inside, and let the silence of my living room settle around me. It was peaceful. Mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to relief. I stood there, feeling the weight of the past settle into place, not crushing me this time, just clarifying everything that had led to the moment Dad told me to talk to, his lawyer. The truth was, he had been disowning parts of me for years. Christmas night was simply the first time he said it out loud. I hung my coat on the hook by the door and walked toward the window. Snow had begun to fall, thin flakes drifting down slowly. I watched them settle on the driveway and felt something steady inside me, something that had been buried under years of being overlooked. It was not anger exactly. It was a certainty. Everything that came next was about to reveal who in that family truly cared, and who had been hiding behind illusions for far too long. And I felt the first quiet spark of something like strength rising again. I watched the snow fall a little while longer, letting the quiet of the night settle the last traces of shaking in my hands. Then I turned away from the window and walked into the kitchen, turning on the small lamp by the counter. Its soft yellow light filled the room with the kind of warmth I never felt in my dad's house anymore. As I stood there, the memories of the past few years returned with a clarity that almost startled me. Everything that exploded at Christmas dinner had been building long before that night. I could track the cracks in our family the same way I could track the cracks inside Hale Industrial Supply, the company that carried our name but had long since lost its way. Looking back, the first real signs of trouble started around the year 2018. At that time, Hale Industrial Supply was already drifting without direction, though Dad refused to see it. He had always believed that hard work and loyalty would carry a business forever. He believed in handshakes more than contracts, relationships more than numbers. Those values served him well for many years, until the industry began changing faster than he could accept. By the time Savannah and Andrew stepped into the picture, the company was already vulnerable, but neither of them had the maturity or the understanding to help. If anything, they made the wounds deeper. Andrew had taken over the day-to-day operations sometime after Dad started, slowing down. He was supposed to be learning the ropes, but most days he could be found on the golf course or tagging along with Savannah to her influencer events. His idea of management was making big promises to customers and then passing the responsibility to the warehouse team. He called it trusting his crew. It was really avoidable. If a delivery went wrong, he blamed the drivers. If a shipment was late, he blamed the suppliers. If a customer complained, he blamed stress. Everything was always someone else's fault. Savannah became involved around the same time Andrew realized he could make her the face of the business. She told Dad that the company needed modernization, branding, digital presence, all the buzzwords she loved. She had read a few articles on marketing and suddenly believed she was the expert who could lead us into the future. Dad, desperate for anything that sounded like innovation, let her do whatever she wanted. She spent thousands of dollars on photo shoots of herself wearing hard hats. She barely knew how to adjust. She filmed behind-the-scenes videos that were more about her hair and outfits than the actual work being done. She hired consultants from Denver to build a marketing strategy that looked beautiful but had no connection to our customers. Most of our clients were small contractors and construction crews who needed reliability, not someone posing with a forklift for the camera. Evelyn, our chief accountant, was the first person who quietly pulled me aside. I still remember that afternoon in the office. It was late autumn of 2019. The sun was low and shining through the blinds, making lines across the paperwork on her desk. She shut the door behind me before she spoke. She said the numbers were not adding up. that invoices were getting paid late, that payments were going out too fast, and that expenses were climbing far quicker than revenue. When she laid out the spreadsheets, the reality became impossible to ignore. There were purchase orders that made no sense, shipments of specialty materials that we had no buyers for, inventory piling up in storage rooms, and no one tracking what was coming in and out. She showed me a list of expenses from Savannah's marketing projects that added up to tens of thousands of dollars. Makeup artists, photographers, catered lunches on shooting days, travel costs for brand partnerships she claimed would expand our market. All of it charged under the business development budget. I asked her why she had not spoken to Dad or Andrew directly. She said she tried. David got defensive and brushed her off, telling her to focus on payroll. Andrew told her to stop worrying so much and accused her of not understanding modern business trends. When she told Savannah to slow down on expenses, Savannah said she did not appreciate being policed by someone who did not know how digital branding worked. Evelyn was stuck. She could see the iceberg ahead, but no one at the wheel cared. Around that time, I started noticing another strange pattern. Delivery reports did not match the actual routes. Some orders were marked as completed, even when drivers insisted they had never gone to those job sites. When I asked the warehouse crew about it, they quietly told me to talk to Cole Henderson, our main logistics coordinator. Cole was a practical man, tough in the way people are when they spend their days on loading docks and the roads. He met me outside near the backlot where trucks idled in a row. He lowered his voice and said he believed Andrew had been altering the logs to make performance numbers look better. He suspected Andrew had been eliminating delivery delays and rewriting timeline, all to impress Dad and make his operations seem more efficient than they were. Cole said he had brought it up to Andrew directly, hoping to fix the issue, but Andrew told him to stop meddling. After that, Cole backed off. He had a wife and 2 kids in Lakewood and needed the job. He did not want to start a fight that could get him fired. Hearing all of this made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It felt like every time I turned around, there was a new sign that the company was being drowned by people who had no business running it. Yet Dad remained convinced Andrew and Savannah were taking Hale's supply into a promising future. He saw their confidence as leadership and my concerns as negativity. The real blow came one evening in early 2023 when Evelyn forwarded me an email she had stumbled across accidentally. It was a chain between Andrew and Savannah. The subject line was frustrating. They were discussing ways to limit my involvement. They described me as controlling and difficult, said I was too focused on old-fashioned systems, and agreed that once the next quarter ended, they would restructure the company to reduce my authority. Savannah wrote that it would be best if I were eased out gradually so Dad would not be too upset. Andrew responded that Dad would go along with anything if they presented it as necessary for growth. Reading those words was like feeling the ground shift under me. I knew Savannah did not like me, but I had underestimated how deeply she wanted me gone. I had underestimated how easily Andrew could be pushed into joining her. And worst of all, I had underestimated how ready Dad might be to believe their narrative over mine. The weeks that followed felt like living under a tightening shadow. Conversations in the office shifted when I walked in. Meetings were scheduled without me. Savannah spoke with a tone that suggested she viewed me as an obstacle rather than family. The atmosphere of the company felt off balance, like everyone was bracing for something but pretending nothing was wrong. As I stood in my quiet kitchen now, remembering all of this, I finally saw the truth clearly. The collapse that happened at Christmas dinner was not sudden. It was not a moment of spontaneous anger from Dad. It was the culmination of years of small betrayals, ignored warnings, and the erosion of trust within both the company and the family. The clock on my stove clicked softly as another hour passed. Snow kept falling, steady and calm outside the window, covering the world in white, while the storm inside my life continued pulling everything apart. I knew then that the next steps were coming faster than anyone expected, and I felt myself preparing, not for a fight in the usual sense, but for the moment when everything would finally break open. I knew then that the next steps were coming faster than anyone expected, and I felt myself preparing, not for a fight in the usual sense, but for the moment when everything would finally break open. The memory of how I ended up saving Hale Industrial Supply drifted in next, slow at first, then sharp enough that it tightened my chest. It was the spring of 2022, a year before everything collapsed. The morning Dad called me, I was already on my way to a client site in Denver. My phone buzzed 3 times before I answered. His voice was lower than usual, rough with the kind of exhaustion he never admitted to. He said he needed help. He said the company was in trouble. He said he did not know who else to call. That last line stayed with me because it was the closest he had come to admitting that things were worse than he had let on. I turned my car around without thinking. By the time I arrived at the warehouse, Dad was standing outside with his hands on his hips, staring at the cracked asphalt like it was the source of all his problems. He looked older than I remembered, his shoulders rounded, and his hair more gray than I had noticed before. When he saw me, his face softened in a way I had not seen in years. Inside the office, he spread out stacks of papers across the conference table. Bills overdue, vendor complaints, customer reports full of missing items and delays, payroll creeping higher each month while revenue barely moved. I felt a wave of shock as I flipped through the pages. It was worse than Evelyn had shown me months earlier. Much worse. It was like someone had cut open the belly of the company and left everything spilling out. Dad sat down heavily and rubbed his forehead. He said he did not know what else to do. He said he could not get a straight answer from Andrew. He said he thought Savannah would help modernize things, but nothing was improving. Then he looked at me in a way that made me feel like I was 16 again and asked if I could fix it. There was no hesitation inside me. For all my frustration, it was the company that carried our name. It was my childhood. It was Mom's old voice, telling me that I had always been capable. It was the part of me that could not watch something die when I knew I could. Save it. I told him I would help. The next months were the hardest of my life. I came in before sunrise and went home after dark. I rewrote routing schedules, reorganized the warehouse, cleaned out shelves full of unordered supplies, rebuilt customer communication processes, and met with vendors one by one to repair the trust Andrew had damaged. There were days when my hands shook from exhaustion as I held a clipboard. There were nights I drove home with my vision blurring from staring at spreadsheets until my eyes hurt. I talked to drivers and warehouse staff, listening to their frustrations and their ideas. They were good people, hardworking and steady, but they had been ignored for too long. They told me about late changes to shipments, unrealistic delivery promises, and instructions coming from Savannah that made no sense. They were relieved to have someone who took them seriously. I took notes on everything and reorganized sections of the warehouse. Materials could be found in seconds instead of hours. The phone calls were constant. Vendors wanted explanations. Customers wanted reassurances. Contractors who had known my dad for 20 years wanted to know if the company was still stable. I spent hours talking to them, listening to their concerns, making promises I fully intended to keep. Slowly, their tone changed from frustration to trust again. During all this, Andrew drifted in and out like a visiting celebrity. He would stroll into the office late morning, smell like cologne and sunscreen from golf practice, and ask if everything was under control. Savannah treated the warehouse like a set for her photo shoots. She would show up with bright lipstick and clean boots that had never stepped on dirt, filming herself while I worked behind her trying to repair the systems she was actively sabotaging. She complained that the warehouse lighting made her look tired. She complained that the forklifts were too loud. She complained that the workers did not smile enough in her videos. To them, my work was not effort. It was an obligation. They saw me as the responsible one, the reliable one, the person who would do the heavy lifting, so they could play the role of leaders without doing any of the labor. They said thank you occasionally, but it was the kind of thank you people give when they expect the work to be done for them. The only person who truly saw what I was doing was Louis Turner, one of our biggest clients. He owned a contracting company in Boulder and had worked with us for years. Louis was a quiet man with a sharp mind, and he had a way of cutting through noise with just a few words. One afternoon, when I delivered updated timelines to him in person, he looked me in the eye and asked how long I thought I could hold everything together, while Andrew drifted around pretending to be a manager. I did not know how to answer. He smiled sadly and said he had watched Dad lean on the wrong people for too long. He told me he admired what I was doing and that he trusted me more than anyone else in the company. He said if the whole operation ever fell apart, he hoped I would build something of my own one day. His words stayed with me for months. By late autumn, the numbers were climbing again. Orders were going out on time. Vendors were calling me instead of complaining. The warehouse workers were smiling again during morning briefings. The entire place felt alive in a way it had not in years. I should have felt proud. I suppose a part of me did, but there was an ache buried under that pride. I knew Dad still saw what I did as temporary help, rather than real leadership. That truth showed itself clearly at the end of the year, during the employee appreciation luncheon. The warehouse had been cleaned spotless, tables set up with trays of food, holiday lights strung across the rafters. Everyone gathered around as Dad stepped forward to give the annual speech. I stood beside Andrew near the front, feeling the warmth of accomplishment settle over the room. Dad held a framed certificate in his hands. He began talking about revitalization, about fresh energy in the company, about new ideas shaping the future. I felt my heart lift for a moment. Then he turned to Andrew. He said Andrew had stepped up in ways no one else could understand. He said Andrew had helped modernize the company and had been essential to turning the year around. People clapped politely. Andrew smiled wide and humble, glancing at Savannah, who was beaming like she had won something herself. I stood there frozen. Dad did not mention me. Not once, not even in passing. I felt the air squeeze tight around my chest. It was a familiar feeling, the same one I had felt when I was a child, and learned that fairness did not apply to me. The warehouse lights shimmered slightly, as if the world had shifted again. After the luncheon, a few workers came up quietly and thanked me for what I had done. Evelyn hugged me. Cole nodded and said he knew the truth. Louis sent me a short message that he had heard about the luncheon and that he hoped I would not let it get to me. But it did. It absolutely did. That night, I sat alone in my car in the parking lot long after everyone else had left. The cold crept in through the windows. The windshield reflected my own tired face back at me. I had given everything to save Hale Supply, and all I was to them was a useful shadow. A tool, the same role I had been cast in all my life. That was the moment I realized something was breaking inside me. Not in a loud, dramatic way, more like a quiet snap, the kind that happens after too much weight has been placed on one point for too long. And with that realization came a slowly rising understanding that everything I had done these past years would be used against me soon. I just did not know how fast the turn would come. I sat there for a long moment in my car after the appreciation luncheon, feeling the quiet snap inside me settle into something still and cold. I did not know then how quickly the next blow would come, only that it was already on its way. Early December arrived with the first heavy snow of the season. Dad called and told me he wanted everyone at the house for what he called an important family meeting. His tone was firm in that familiar way that always meant a decision had already been made. I drove over with a calm that felt almost unnatural, like my body had accepted something my heart had not caught up to yet. When I walked into the living room, the fireplace was lit and the windows were fogged from the heat inside meeting. The winter air. David sat in his usual recliner with a stack of papers on the side table. Andrew and Savannah were already on the couch. She had one leg crossed over the other, tapping her foot in a slow rhythm, as if she were counting down to something. Andrew looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from knowing you are about to get what you want without deserving it. Savannah was the first to speak. She folded her hands neatly in her lap and said that after careful review of company needs and future goals, she believed it was time to restructure leadership. She used phrases like long-term vision and modern strategy and fresh perspective. She talked as if she had spent years studying business instead of months, staging photo shoots in the warehouse. She said the company needed one clear voice at the top, and that voice should be Andrew. Then she turned slightly toward me and said she hoped I would embrace a new advisory role that would allow me to focus on what she called my strengths, without the pressure of day-to-day decisions. Her tone had a smooth sweetness to it that barely hid the satisfaction underneath. Andrew nodded along. He added that he had been feeling overwhelmed and believed this change would help everyone work together better. He used words like teamwork and unity, but looked everywhere except at me. Dad reached for the papers beside him. I recognized a few. Adjusted role descriptions, signature lines, a summary of the restructuring plan. He held them out to me and said he needed my signature so they could move forward. For a moment, the room felt strangely silent. I looked from Andrew to Savannah and then to Dad. It was so clear then. This was not a sudden decision. This was not a response to a crisis. This had been planned quietly for months. Every sideways glance, every meeting I was left out of, every shift in tone at the warehouse had led to this moment. Inside me, the hurt rose first, sharp and hot. But it did not surprise me. I think the part of me that once hoped they would see my worth had already been fading. What replaced it now was something steadier, something close to resignation, but lined with clarity. I set the papers down on the coffee table and told Dad that if they wanted to move forward this way, fine. But I said I wanted the money I had invested back. I said I wanted what I had put into the company returned to me fairly. Dad frowned, that deep, disappointed frown he used whenever I asked for something he did not approve of. He said the family did not calculate debts. He said we all contributed in our own ways. He said asking for reimbursement made me sound ungrateful. Savannah's eyes shifted to me, and something in her expression tightened. She looked almost amused. Confidence, as if she had finally confirmed some belief about me, as if she knew exactly how this moment would unfold. She had seen me swallow blame before, let things slide, keep the peace. She thought I would do it again. Her face told me she was sure of it. Dad picked up a pen and signed the papers himself. It was quick and casual, like signing a delivery confirmation. Then he told Andrew to do the same. I watched them pass the stack back and forth with the comfortable ease of people who never questioned whether they were right. I stayed still. My breathing stayed even. It was the kind of calm you get when the final piece of a puzzle clicks into place, and the picture becomes undeniable. They needed me when the company was dying. They needed me when they could not fix anything themselves. And now that the numbers looked better, now that the hard work was already done, they believed they could push me aside without consequence. Mom sat at the edge of the room, her hands folded tightly together. She looked at me with eyes that were already apologizing. She knew. She always knew. But she never had the strength to speak against Dad when he was convinced he was right. When it was clear no one else had more to say, I stood. My legs felt heavy but steady. I picked up my coat from the arm of the chair and put it on slowly. No one tried to stop me, not even for courtesy. It was as if the room had already agreed that my presence was no longer necessary. On my way out, I glanced back one more time. Savannah was watching me. Her chin lifted slightly, her expression relaxed in victory. She did not need words to say what she was thinking. She had won. She had pushed me out, quietly, neatly, exactly the way she wanted. I stepped outside into the cold. The air hit my lungs hard, clearing out the heat in my chest. Snow had started falling again, light and soft. The ground was already dusted white like a clean slate, though mine was anything but. As I walked to my car, I had a sudden, sharp certainty that Christmas dinner was not going to be just another tense holiday. It would be the final cut. The moment everything snapped beyond repair. And whatever happened that night would change everything that came after. Snow crunched under my boots as I reached my car, and for the first time that season, I did not feel the cold. I felt something else, a quiet steadiness, a final drop of patience settling into place. By the time I pulled out of Dad's driveway that evening, the decision had already formed inside me. Clean and sharp as ice. I drove home through the silent streets of Golden, parked in my driveway, and walked straight to my office corner. I did not even take my coat off. I powered up my laptop, opened the contract Dad had signed the year before when he begged me to help, rebuild the company, and read through it one more time to make sure every clause was exactly where I remembered. Every system I had created, every license I owned, every piece of digital infrastructure running under HaleOps Cloud, all of it connected to my account, my intellectual property, my oversight, and all of it is bound by a simple rule. If my role was terminated, access could be revoked with written notice. I typed the notice, one short paragraph. I attached the termination clause. I hit send. 30 seconds later, I opened the administrative panel for Hail Ops Cloud. One by one, I removed user permissions. First, the warehouse accounts, then the dispatch team, then the purchasing department, then Savannah's shiny marketing profile, and finally, Andrew's. When I clicked disable, there was a small sound from my laptop, like a lock sliding into place. For the first time in years, I felt in control of something that had been slipping away piece by piece. Morning came faster than I expected. I slept maybe 3 hours. When I woke, the sky was pale, and the snow outside looked untouched. I made coffee and sat in my kitchen listening to the quiet, knowing exactly what was happening 17 miles away at the warehouse. By 8 in the morning, my phone lit up, vibrating non-stop across the counter. Calls, texts, emails bouncing back to the company account. I did not respond to any of them. Not yet. Later, when Cole told me what the warehouse looked like that morning, he said it was as if someone had kicked the legs out from under an old table that had been wobbling for years. Drivers showed up for their morning routes, only to find that the dispatch board was blank. No printed tickets, no route maps, no loading instructions. The warehouse floor was stacked with pallets, some labeled, some not. Aisles clogged with materials Andrew had ordered based on guesses rather than actual demand. I could picture it clearly. Chase, the most experienced driver we had, standing near the loading dock, holding an empty clipboard, trying to piece the day together by memory. He probably walked around asking if anyone had seen a delivery list. Someone probably told him to check the office. In the office, they probably told him to check the dashboard, and the dashboard was dark, demanding a login no one had anymore. A few workers tried shouting instructions across the floor. Someone pulled up old screenshots of routes on their phone. 2 drivers argued near the East Bay over which job site had been scheduled. First, because both insisted they were told different things last week. Someone else tried to call Andrew, but the call went to voicemail. Around 9 in the morning, during the worst of the confusion, the inevitable happened. Chase tried lifting a pallet of framing brackets with one of the older forklift, maybe trying to help a team that had been waiting for 10 minutes to get loaded. He lifted too quickly, the load shifted, and the entire pallet tipped, crashing onto the floor with a deafening metallic clatter that echoed through the warehouse. Someone filmed it. Not maliciously, just shock. The clip hit YouTube within an hour. I saw it later. The sound of the brackets hitting the concrete was sharp enough to make me flinch, even though I knew what was coming. By 11, the chaos had only grown. Orders were scattered. Deliveries delayed. A few drivers went home out of frustration, and that was before Cole stepped in. Cole called me around lunchtime. His voice was calm, but I could hear something heavy sitting behind his words. He said he had seen enough. He said he had covered for Andrew for too long. Then he told me why he was done. He said he had discovered in early 2021 that Andrew had been submitting falsified delivery reports to inflate performance metrics. Cole confronted him back then. Andrew brushed him off and told him to stop acting self-righteous. Now, seeing the state of the warehouse, seeing the panic on the faces of the workers who relied on clear direction, Cole decided he was no longer willing to put his reputation behind a man who could not tell the truth. He said he was halting his coordination work until someone competent took charge. I thanked him quietly. We both knew that call marked a point of no return for the company. By early afternoon, Dad finally got through to me. The moment I answered, his voice burst out loud and frantic, a tone I had not heard since I was a child. He asked why the systems were locked. He asked why the routes had vanished. He said people were losing their minds at the warehouse, and that customers were calling non-stop. I let him speak until the rush of words slowed. Then I reminded him of the contract he had signed, the one that handed me full authority over the systems and ownership of the book, technology behind them, the one that allowed me to revoke access if my role was terminated. I said simply that they had terminated me when they demoted me. He went silent. Then he told me to fix it. I told him I was under no obligation to do so. In the middle of his next argument, another call came in from Trent. an IT consultant Andrew had hired without my knowledge months back. Trent rarely spoke with urgency, but that morning he did. He called Dad first, then called me, and I happened to pick up on the second ring. He said the company could not restore the HaleOps system without my authorization because every key file and server license was tied to my account. He said it would take weeks, possibly months, to rebuild from scratch, and that even then, they would lose years of data. He said Andrew had completely underestimated how much of the company depended on the systems I had built. I thanked him for his honesty. He sighed and said he was sorry it had come to this. I believed him. The tension was climbing by the hour. Calls escalated from questions to accusations to pleas. I stayed in my living room, the snow brightening through the windows as the day went on, my phone buzzing across the table every few minutes. Around late afternoon, I walked outside for air. The cold stung my cheeks instantly. I stood on my porch and breathed in until my chest felt tight. The world seemed strangely peaceful compared to what I knew was happening on the other side of town. I thought back to the moment I said okay at Dad's dinner table. Just one word. So calm, almost quiet. But 26 hours later, everything they had built around appearances and denial and favoritism was cracking open. I stayed outside until the cold numbed my fingers. When I stepped back inside, I knew the storm was only beginning. I stepped back inside and rubbed warmth into my hands, but the cold I felt was no longer from the weather. It was from the certainty that the next day would not simply be more chaos. It would be the kind that broke whatever was still standing. And I was right. The morning of December 27th began with my phone lighting up again. But this time, it was not just missed calls from Dad. It was notifications from people I had not spoken to in months. A neighbor near the warehouse sent me a message saying the parking lot was full of angry customers, some of them pounding on the front doors, demanding their orders. She said it looked like a riot waiting to happen. Cole confirmed it an hour later when he called. His voice sounded tense in a way I had never heard. He said a crowd had formed outside the warehouse by 7:30 in the 8 morning. Contractors wrapped in thick jackets were shouting over each other. They wanted their supplies and wanted to know who had messed up the holidays for their crews. At one point, a customer grabbed a clipboard from an employee and threw it on the ground. Another tried to shove his way past the front counter. Inside, things were no better. Andrew was arguing with a group of workers, yelling that they needed to calm the customers down, yelling that someone needed to find the route sheets, yelling at anything that looked like it might be blamable. His face was red and his hair was sticking up like he had run his hands through it 100 times. He tried to blame Trent for the system failure, but Trent refused to take responsibility for something he could not control. By then, still wearing heavy makeup despite the early hour, she looked frantic, glancing between the workers and her phone as she scrolled through comments. Flooding, she kept repeating that her reputation was collapsing and that this was humiliating. She did not seem to grasp that the company itself was unraveling. When customers began pushing through the entrance, shouting over one another, Andrew stepped forward and tried to raise his voice over them. It did not work. A driver who had been waiting all morning, threw his hands up and walked out. Cole said he later saw that same driver sitting in his truck with his face in his hands. Around mid-morning, the tension inside the warehouse grew so thick, it felt like the air itself was vibrating. Mom showed up around then, her coat pulled tight around her shoulders. She had heard from a neighbor that the warehouse was in trouble and had driven over in a panic. She tried to talk to Andrew. She tried to talk to Dad, who had arrived shortly after. Her voice cracked with every word. At one point, she pressed her hands to her face, as if trying to hold herself together. She kept saying she just wanted everyone to stop shouting. Savannah barely noticed Mom. She was too busy pacing near the front windows while looking at her phone. She kept muttering that her sponsorship deals were at risk. She said this never should have happened during a holiday weekend. She said someone needed to fix things before people started blaming her publicly. She said everything except, "I am sorry," or "How do we help?" Around midday, things took a sharp turn. A neighbor who lived 2 lots over from the warehouse apparently heard the shouting from the street. He told the dispatcher it sounded like someone was fighting over property and that the yelling had lasted almost an hour. Not long after that, Deputy Carla Reyes arrived. She walked into the building with the calm and steady posture of someone who had seen far worse scenes than a failing business. But even she paused when she took in the sight of employees arguing, customers pacing angrily, and Andrew shouting at Dad in the middle of the loading area. Deputy Reyes raised a hand and told everyone to separate. Her voice cut through the noise instantly. She told people to step back, told the customers to wait outside, told the workers to give space or risk being removed from the premises. She had a kind of authority that demanded obedience without needing to shout. While she was restoring order inside, something happened in the parking lot that pushed everything further into chaos. A tow truck rolled in, flashing bright amber lights. The driver approached one of the company vehicles, a box truck used for larger deliveries. He checked his paperwork, nodded once, and began hooking the truck to the tow rig. A few employees rushed outside, demanding to know what he was doing. He said the loan had been delinquent for too long, and he was therefore repossession. He was not interested in excuses. It was his job. When that truck lifted off the ground, several workers froze. Someone shouted that they needed that truck for the last deliveries of the year. Someone else cursed under their breath. Savannah shrieked and said they could not let the truck be taken because customers would think the company was failing. Her voice cracked on the word failing. Inside, Dad's voice could be heard through the open bay doors. He sounded unlike himself, desperate and confused. When he saw the tow truck pulling away, something in him seemed to break. He turned on Andrew and started shouting that this was his fault. He said Andrew had assured him everything was under control. He said he trusted him, and now the company was falling apart. Andrew fired back. He shouted that Dad had never given him a chance to lead properly. He said I had always overshadowed him. He said Dad only blamed him because he did not want to admit he had put the wrong person in charge. The two of them stepped closer and closer, voices rising, until Deputy Reyes had to step between them and tell them to back away before someone did something they could not undo. It was the kind of moment that leaves a room silent afterward, not out of peace, but out of shock. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. It was Dad. His message came through first, then another, then another, then a call, then another call, then a voicemail, then more messages. I did not have to listen to know what they said. I could picture his voice, shaking and thin with fear. I could picture him saying he needed help, saying the company was collapsing, saying he did not understand how everything had gone so wrong, saying he needed me. But I did not answer, not yet. I sat in my quiet living room, hands resting on my knees, listening to the phone vibrate across the wooden table. Each buzz echoed in the room like a reminder of every moment they dismissed me, every time they believed someone else over me. Every year, Dad looked past me to Andrew, every chance they had to treat me as family, and chose not to. As evening approached, the calls finally slowed. I picked up the phone, looked at the screen, and let it go dark in my hands. It was the first time I realized they were not calling to demand something from me. They were calling because for the first time in their lives, they needed me. And I did not know yet whether I would go back. I sat there with the phone still in my hand, long after the screen went dark. The house felt too quiet, like the air was holding its breath with me. I did not sleep much that night. The sounds outside seemed louder than usual. The wind brushing against the windows, a car door in the distance, the hum of the heater cycling on and off. By morning, I felt drained, but calmer. Calmer in a way that lets the truth settle instead of circling like smoke. Around 8, I heard a knock at my front door. A soft, hesitant knock, not the pounding kind of someone who came for a confrontation. When I opened it, Evelyn stood on my porch with a folder held tight against her chest. She looked tired, as if the weight of what she carried had followed her for days. She stepped inside and asked if she could sit. I nodded and motioned her toward the living room chair across from me. She placed the folder on her lap and stared at it before she spoke. She said she had been trying to decide whether to bring it to me for a long time. And after the chaos at the warehouse yesterday, she realized I needed to know the full truth. She opened the folder slowly. The first set of papers showed loan documents with Andrew's signature. He had borrowed $120,000 through a short-term lender with high fees. The loan was taken under the company's name and justified as expansion costs. But the money never went toward anything operational. Evelyn said the first red flag appeared when she noticed a series of payments made from the loan deposits to cover vendor bills that should have been paid months earlier. She said Andrew had hidden the losses by rolling them into new transactions and hoping Dad would not dig too deeply. The next stack of papers showed marketing expenditures. Savannah had used the company card for personal items disguised as marketing. Needs: plane tickets to Los Angeles for a brand event, hotel stays in Scottsdale, luxury clothing for photo shoots, a designer laptop bag for live stream appearances. The amount totaled more than $30,000 over the course of a year. Evelyn said every time she questioned a charge, Savannah said it was essential for maintaining her public image, which she believed reflected positively on the company. She said Dad approved them because he thought supporting Savannah's ideas would give Andrew confidence. Then came the part that made my stomach tighten. A printed email exchange between Dad and their financial advisor from back in 2021. The advisor had warned that expenses were rising too quickly and that Andrew's leadership decisions needed closer supervision. The advisor wrote that the company needed auditing if it wanted to stay strong. For the next decade, David responded that he trusted his son and that too much oversight might discourage him. He ignored the warnings. I closed my eyes for a moment as Evelyn spoke. It felt like every sheet of paper in that folder was another piece of proof that the collapse had not happened in 48 hours. It had been building for years. Then she told me something I had not expected. Andrew had received inventory reports throughout the year showing product, waste, and unused purchases. He signed off on them anyway. He told her not to burden Dad with too many details. She said he was always more focused on seeming in control than actually being in control. When she finished, she placed the folder on the coffee table between us. She said she did not come to convince me to return. She came because she believed I deserved honesty. She thanked me for listening, then stood and let herself out quietly. I stayed seated for a long time, staring at the folder. Eventually, I walked to the kitchen to make coffee. But before I could even start the machine, there was another knock on the front door. This one is softer and somehow sadder. It was Mom. She stepped inside slowly, almost as if she were afraid she did not have the right to. Her eyes were already red. She looked around the living room as if searching for the right place to stand, then reached out and touched my arm before she began to speak. Her voice caught more than once. She said she had watched what happened to me since I was a child. She said she remembered every time I was pushed aside for Andrew. Every time Dad told me I needed to be understanding because Andrew had more pressure on him. Every time I achieved something and was told not to brag because it might make Andrew feel inadequate. She said she had wanted to speak up. She had wanted to defend me, but she had lived her whole marriage trying to keep peace, trying to avoid setting Dad off, trying not to split the family apart. She said she now realized that staying silent had done exactly that. It had split us in a way that could not be undone. When she apologized, she broke down. She cried in a way I had never seen her cry before. I stood there with her in my arms, holding her while she said she wished she had been braver. She said she wished she had protected me when I needed it most. When she left, I walked to the window and watched her drive away. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Not anger and not quite forgiveness, but a kind of clarity. Later that afternoon, I received a call from Lewis Turner. His voice sounded steady and warm, the way it always had. He told me he had heard what happened and that he believed I would land on my feet, no matter what. Then he said something that surprised me. He said he wanted to discuss an exclusive partnership between his firm and the company I had been quietly building on the side over the last couple of years. He said he trusted my judgment more than anyone else in the region and wanted to be among the first to support whatever I did next. I felt something inside me shift, a realization that everything I had poured into Hale Industrial Supply, every late night and early morning and long stretch of work, did not die with that company. It lived in the skills I had built. It lived in the respect I had earned from people who saw my worth, even when my own family did not. As evening settled, I went back to the folder Evelyn left and opened it again. This time I read through every page, With each line I read, I understood the truth more clearly. The company had not collapsed because I pulled their access. It had collapsed because the roots had been rotting for years. My decision only revealed what was already there. By the time I closed the folder, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I was not going back. I told myself I would not think about the company anymore. But when the new year arrived, it became impossible to avoid the news that drifted back to me. Bad news has a way of finding its owner. It showed up in voicemail messages, in short texts from former employees, in whispers, passed along by people who had once depended on the Hale name. I did not chase any of it. I simply listened as the truth unfolded piece by piece. In the first week of January 2024, Hale Industrial Supply lost one of the contracts that had kept them afloat for almost a decade. It was the kind of contract that acted like a backbone for a small family business. Steady orders, reliable payments, a long-standing relationship that carried weight during hard seasons. Louis had hinted it was coming, but hearing it was official struck me harder than I expected. Losing that contract meant they would not have the revenue cushion needed to survive the mounting financial hits. By the second week, their business insurance carrier reviewed the incident reports from December and flagged the warehouse as high risk. The videos from the meltdown had traveled far online. Too many accidents. Too much disorganization, too much employee turnover. The insurer sent them a notice saying they would not renew the business policy. Trent later told me that without coverage, they would not legally be able to deliver to several commercial clients. Even if they found a new carrier, the premium would be far beyond what they could afford. Vendors began filing claims around the same time. Some were patient and had warned Andrew for months, but patience ended once the new year started. I received a message from Cole that one supplier had filed a lawsuit for unpaid balances exceeding $50,000. Another sent a certified letter giving a final deadline before taking legal action. The company found itself surrounded on all sides, with no way to cover the growing debt. I did not celebrate any of it. There was nothing satisfying about watching something my grandfather built shrink into dust. But there was no point pretending it was not happening. What happened next was even more predictable. Andrew became the focus of the fallout. That $120,000 loan he had taken out under company, credit came back in full force. The lender filed a complaint claiming misrepresentation, and Andrew received notice that he could be held personally liable. He tried to argue that he had acted in the company's best interest, and that he had expected future revenue to cover the payments, but the documents Evelyn gave me showed a different story. Too many inconsistencies, too many attempts to hide missing inventory and unused purchases. While that storm brewed, Savannah made her move. She packed her things in early February and left Colorado. For a while, she hid her location behind curated posts of brunch plates and shopping bags. But eventually, people learned she had moved to Dallas. She joined the social circle of a tech entrepreneur she had been seen with before. Andrew was left alone, drowning in legal trouble and bills he could no longer push aside. Someone later told me he tried calling Savannah repeatedly, but she blocked him. She did not even keep the courtesy of a slow fade. She cut the line clean. The part that struck me most was hearing that Mom had started selling pieces of her rare book collection. Books she had spent years collecting from estate sales and small shops in quiet towns. Some of them were first editions of novels she loved. She could recite lines from them by heart when I was a girl. Now she was forced to sell them because the family needed money fast. She never told me directly. I heard it from a neighbor who used to help her at local library events. The thought of her wrapping each book carefully before handing it to a dealer made my chest tighten. Dad tried to keep the house for as long as he could, but the bank would not wait forever. By March, foreclosure papers arrived. The property was valued lower than he expected due to maintenance issues he had ignored for years while trying to cover company losses. After the sale went through, Dad moved into a small apartment near Lakewood. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, a parking lot crowded with delivery vans and secondhand sedans. He took a part-time job driving for a local courier service to cover his rent. The same man who once stood tall as the owner of a respected supply company was now delivering packages in the snow, wearing a reflective vest and scanning boxes in the cold. People asked me later if I felt vindicated. The honest answer was no. This was not vindication. It was the cost of years of denial finally arriving at their doorstep. One late afternoon, near the end of March, I received a call from a number I did not recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something nudged me to answer. When I picked up, I heard Dad's voice on the other end. Older, thinner, quieter, the tone of someone who had been carrying more weight than he could hold. He said he was sitting outside his apartment. He said he did not know where to begin. He said things had gotten worse than he ever imagined they could. He talked slowly at first, then faster, as if afraid he would lose the courage to speak if he paused too long. He told me he had been in denial for years, that he had ignored every warning because he wanted to believe Andrew could grow into the kind of leader the company needed. He said he felt ashamed for not listening to me, ashamed for dismissing me, ashamed for letting the family fall apart. He said he was sorry. Not the hollow sorry offered in passing, not the defensive sorry wrapped in excuses. It was the kind of apology that comes from someone who has seen the consequences of their choices with painful clarity. He said he wished he had treated me differently. He said he wished he had seen me sooner. He said he wished he had understood the cost of choosing one child over another. His voice cracked when he said he did not know how to fix anything, but he hoped one day I might forgive him. Listening to him broke something open inside me. I did not interrupt him. I let him speak until the words slowed. When I answered, I kept my voice steady. I told him I was not seeking revenge. I told him I did not want to see him hurt. I told him I had simply reached a point where I could no longer let myself be used, dismissed, or sacrificed. I said I had stopped carrying the burden he handed to me so long ago. I said stepping away was the only thing I could do to protect myself. Then I told him the truth that had sat inside me for months. I told him this was not about punishing him or Andrew or anyone else. It was about choosing not to let the same pattern repeat. It was about reclaiming the dignity I had put aside every time I came running back to save them. I told him I wished things had been different, but I could not go back to the person I used to be. His breathing was shaky on the other end. He said he understood. For the first time, he truly meant it. When the call ended, I sat quietly by the window of my home, watching the last light of day fade. The world outside was still and cold. A thin layer of frost clung to the edges of the glass. I felt the weight in my chest shift, not vanish, but move in a way that allowed me to breathe deeper than I had in years. I stood there in the quiet and understood something clearly. This was the first time in my life I had chosen myself without asking for permission. I stood by the window a long time after that call ended, watching the sky turn from pale blue to the soft gray of an early spring evening. A different kind of quiet settled in me, one that felt earned instead of imposed. When the phone vibrated again, it was not Dad, not Andrew, not anyone tied to the old life. It was Louis. He sent a short message saying the documents were ready whenever I was. By the following week, I met him at his firm. We sat at a long wooden table that smelled faintly of lemon polish, the kind of space built for serious decisions that changed the direction of entire companies. Louis talked through the contract slowly, not rushing, making sure I understood every detail. It was an exclusive services agreement with his development group, spanning multiple projects and carrying more responsibility than anything I had overseen at Hale Industrial Supply. He said he trusted me, said he believed I had the rare ability to build systems that actually worked, and said he wanted to support someone who had been undervalued for far too long. I signed my name on the final page, feeling something shift inside me. Not excitement exactly, not relief either. It was steadier than that. It felt like stepping into a room where the door closed softly behind me, sealing out everything that had weighed on me for years. 2 other companies reached out in the same month. One was a construction firm in Fort Collins, run by a woman who had followed my old work quietly from a distance. The other was a logistics outfit near Colorado Springs. Both said they had heard about the chaos at Hale Industrial Supply and wanted someone who knew how to keep things from falling apart. For the first time, people saw my value without needing me to prove it repeatedly. I did not chase those opportunities. They came to me. By April, my own company was busy enough that I hired 2 part-time analysts and a project coordinator. I watched them work with a familiarity that reminded me of who I had been before my family managed to wear me down. Watching them function with confidence made me realize how much I had carried alone in the past. Mom visited occasionally, not often, only when she felt steady enough to do so. She would bring a pie from a bakery she liked, or a stack of recipes she wanted to try with me. She talked more softly now, choosing her words with care. There was no pretending that the past had not happened, but she no longer tiptoed around it. She apologized in small ways that felt more meaningful than any speech could have. She always left before it got dark, giving me a gentle hug at the door and promising to come by again soon. I heard from Andrew only once. A brief message forwarded to me by a cousin. He had moved to northern Utah and taken a job at a small construction company. As a junior coordinator, he earned an hourly wage and handled basic tasks like inventory counting and delivery scheduling, the very things he once dismissed as beneath him. I pictured him in steel-toe boots and a reflective vest, bent over a clipboard, taking instructions from someone younger than him. It was not spite that I felt. It was recognition that he was finally living in a reality he could not escape, with charm or excuses. Dad reached out occasionally, always with respect, always waiting for permission before taking up space in my day. He told me he was trying to rebuild his life, one piece at a time. He had taken on steady delivery work for a local courier service, driving across Denver in all kinds of weather. He said it was humbling but honest work. He said he was learning who he was without the power he had relied on. His voice no longer carried the weight of expectation, only the hope of connection. I answered when I was able, and I did not when I was not. He accepted that. In early summer, I received an unexpected email from Marcus Delaney, the CEO of a large regional manufacturer. He had heard about my new company through Louis. Marcus wanted to discuss a long-term partnership, something that could shape the next decade of my business. He said he admired people who rebuilt themselves after betrayal because they understood resilience in a way others did not. I read the message twice. Then again, it felt like the final confirmation that I had stepped into a life that fit me, not the one I had been boxed into. That night, I sat on my back porch, watching the light fade behind the foothills. A soft breeze moved through the trees, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely unburdened. Not because everything was perfect, but because nothing was held over me anymore. I did not need my family's approval or validation. I did not need them to understand who I was or why I left. I had done the hardest thing a person can do. I stepped away from the story they kept trying to write for me, and finally wrote my own. I realized then that freedom had nothing to do with revenge. It had nothing to do with proving anything. Freedom was the moment I no longer needed them to see me. It was the moment I stopped trying to earn a place at a table that had never been meant for me. When people ask what happened after I walked away from Christmas dinner, I tell them the truth. I did not destroy them. I simply stepped out of the way and let their choices catch up to them. Karma did the rest. I stood up from the porch chair as the evening turned dark, feeling steady and grounded. My life was not perfect, but it was mine. Every page from now on would be written by my hand alone. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.